Greetings! It is I, ColdSnap and Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome! It is time to continue our talking about the history of Magic the Gathering. Today, I'm going to talk about alliances. So let's just dive into it. Alliances was released in June of 1996. It had 199 cards, but some of those included cards with alternate art, which was still in this set. There were actually 144 individual cards. So about 55 cards were actually ones with alternate art. Now it was the second set in the Ice Age block. Well, technically it was the third set when the original block of Ice Age was printed, since Homelands was originally the second set. But when Homelands was removed and ColdSnap came in, it became the second set in the block, effectively. Now it was the first set to sort of show this sort of the way a block worked. That they had one block that had lands and was a larger one, and then they would have a number of sets, two sets after that, which were smaller and usually did not include lands. So this was the first one to have this sort of format. Now it was set as a continuation of Ice Age's storyline. Now this is a set that actually had a violent tinge to its text block, and it is the last one to have anything similar to that. It was released 8 months after Homelands, and it actually was worked on by the same group that worked on Ice Age, so it actually had this continuity in comparison to Homelands, which an entirely different group that didn't have a lot of communication worked on. Now it is also the last set to be sold in booster packs of 12 cards. As I said previously, Chronicles was also sold in this way. This was the only other set to be sold this manner. And they sold 45 packs to a booster box. Now every pack had the same art on it. Now it did show art, like a lot of packs had already begun to do, but it only had the same art on it every time. Now this was also the last set to have multiple versions of the same card. The last set where they printed that. It was also the last set to be vastly underprinted. Now no new keywords or major mechanics really existed here. This deck did have something that specialized, alternate costs for playing cards, in particular pitch cards, where I could discard a card from my hand and say, instead of paying the cost for a spell in order to cast it. Now a lot of the themes that were in Ice Age continued in this set. And as I said, it was the same team that did Ice Age. Now something that they wanted to do was have a race of sentient gorillas in this set. Don't ask me why. I think they wanted to do a little bit of Planet of the Apes in there. So they did manage to have some gorillas in there, but they didn't have it probably as powerfully designed as they originally wanted, because people thought it was a silly idea. So they ended up with a good amount of cards with gorilla in the name in this set because of that. So there are a lot of gorillas, and it's just probably not as much as there would have been if they got their way. Now, two other things that they did have were, of course, replacement lands. I'll talk about those a little later. I'll give a couple of examples of those. And they did have a lot of tri-colored, multicolored cards. Now they've had tri-colored legends before, but not a lot of tri-colored cards that had been non-legend, had even existed up until now. So this is the set that really started coming out with tri-colored spells that weren't legendary. Now there also is a tier system within the rares of alliances. It wasn't something that was really seen, but because of the way that it was printed, certain rares weren't printed as much. So there are certain rares in the set which are rarer, and this is something that hasn't been seen until Mythic Rares came out. So this was sort of like a built-in precursor to Mythic Rares in this set. It's just that you didn't know about it as the person collecting them at the time. It wasn't until, people knew about what was printed and what sort of groups they were printed in, but people began to learn what was rare and what wasn't. So as I said, the story continues where Ice Age left off. We have Freyalise, a planeswalker, who casts this world spell, which ends the Ice Age. Upon this, the world begins to thaw, and civilization sort of attempts to rebuild to a degree. But then they have to contend with Lim-dul and his army of the undead, the evil necromancer. And so, the empires that had been existing in the Ice Age, what is there of them, has to reunite in order to fight and defeat Lim-dul. And that's sort of hence the title of this set is Alliances, as they had to form alliances in order to fight and defeat Lim-dul. So let's talk about some cards from this set. First I want to talk about Moldovan Hordes. Moldovan Hordes was pretty cheap. It was a 5/5, but you had to discard a card at random when you played it. So it was a quick creature you could get out, but you had to discard a card. There was diminishing returns, where all players would shuffle their hands and their graveyards into their libraries, and then they would chuck out the top 10 cards of their library before drawing a hand of 7 new cards. Next up is Elvish Spirit Guide. For this one, I could, if I have it in my hand, I could exile it, remove it from the game, and I could add 1 green mana to my mana pool. Next up is Force of Will. This is an example of the pitch cards I was talking to, but a little bit to the extreme. For this one, I could pay the alternate cost of 1 life and exiling a blue card, and then I can counter a spell. This means I could counter a spell first turn with Force of Will. It's actually one of the most expensive cards in the set. It is really good. Next up is Ivory Gargoyle. This one, if it's put into the graveyard from play, you return it to play, but then you skip your next draw phase. And you can pay mana to exile. Next up is Kil'jaeden Outpost. This one is one of the lands I was talking about, where you had to sacrifice a land when it came into play. There was one of every sort of color. This one, after you sacrificed the plains, because it's white-based, you could use it to create soldier tokens. Similarly, there was Lake of the Dead, which you also had to sacrifice a swamp. Its special ability was that you could sacrifice a swamp to it to add 4 black mana to your mana pool. So you had to get rid of the swamp when you played it, and you could also get rid of more swamps for sudden bursts of mana. Next up is Thawing Glaciers. Thawing Glaciers came into play tapped, but when you could use it, you could tap 1, tap it, search your library for a basic land, put it into play tapped, and then return Thawing Glaciers to your hand. So it was an actual way of getting more lands, but it was like I had a land in my hand which was Thawing Glaciers, I had no other lands to play, I could put it out, and then I could slowly start replacing it and putting it out again. I mean, the first turn you do lose that turn that it comes into play tapped. But after that, I use it to find a land, and then replay Thawing Glaciers. So it comes to play tapped again, but I already got that land, which I just searched for, so it's a cycle that works decently once you get it started. Now there was Nature's Wrath. Nature's Wrath was a card that targeted the 2 enemy colors to green, so it targeted blue and black. What it would do is, if you had put a swamp into play or played a black spell, you had to sacrifice a black permanent or sacrifice a swamp. Same was for blue. So if you played a blue spell or put an island out, you'd have to sacrifice an island or a blue permanent. After that, it was Pillage. Pillage was bury target artifact or land. There's Soldari Digger. Soldari Digger is you paid some mana and you could put a card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. It's a good way of putting some cards back in your library, especially if you have search ability. After that is Ashnod Silex. Ashnod Silex is you could tap 3 mana, look at the top cards of target opponent's library. You remove 1 of them from the game and put the others back on. You targeted the top cards and sort of picked the best out of them that you think you wanted to remove. There was Energy Arc. Energy Arc, you could untap any number of target creatures and they deal nor receive damage. So this could be both protective or defensive. There was Latnam's Legacy. Latnam's Legacy is you took a card from your hand, you shuffled it into your library, and during the beginning of your next upkeep, you drew 2 cards. So it was a way that I could get rid of something from my hand, and I would get 2 cards out of it. Then there was the Lord of Treasurehorn. The Lord of Treasurehorn cost you 4 mana. It was a 10/4. That was 3 different colors of mana. When it came into play, you had to pay 2 life, sacrifice 2 creatures, and an opponent drew 2 cards. But it also regenerated for 1 black mana. It was mean. And the final one I want to talk about is Feldegriff. I might be pronouncing his name wrong. It's a goddamn flying hippo. That's what it was. I'm not going to go over what it does. It does very silly things. But it's a flying hippo. Enough is said about Feldegriff. So that's it for today. I've gone over and talked about the history of alliances and giving you some information about it. I've also gone over some cards from that set and let you know about them. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like this video if you enjoyed. It shows your support for the channel, for the Empire, and for the work I do. Please subscribe if you already haven't. We're always looking for more members, more citizens. And please, share this video. If you know anybody that would learn from it, or would just enjoy watching it, share it with them. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.